and amen. One of the undeniable results of God's salvation is that those who receive it are debtors to God, not for the years of time alone, to borrow the words of that old hymn, but for eternity. And by describing the Lord's people as those He saves as debtors, I'm not suggesting for a moment that they have a debt to God that has to be paid off so that they will get into heaven when they die. Make no mistake about it, that's the important thing, that when you die, you enter heaven. But I'm not suggesting by saying that we're debtors that there's a debt you have to work off to get there. I admit that there are many who think that way, and because they think that way, they are trying to do the best that they can, and they're trying to be the best they can to live up to what they think will please God. And their hope is that He'll be pleased enough to give them an escape from hell and a ticket into heaven. Those who approach the salvation of their soul in that way are indeed debtors. But they are not debtors to God. Paul states in Galatians chapter 5 that anyone who pins his hopes of obtaining God's salvation by obeying the law, that is, by trying to do the best you can and be the best you can, is a debtor to the law. If you're going to use your efforts to keep God's law as the basis of your salvation and entrance into heaven, then you're going to have to keep all of God's law. Because God also says that cursed is every one that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Galatians 3:10. Cursed if you don't continually keep all the law. Cursed. Note that continueth not in all things. That means perfect obedience always, and perfect obedience in every commandment. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he's guilty of breaking all the law. And that means it's absolutely impossible for a man to be saved by trying to be the best that he can and do the best that he can. Impossible to be saved, because no man is justified, as Paul says, no man is justified by the law in the sight of God. He's a debtor to the law, obligated to keep its every command, and it is a debt that, quite frankly, he simply cannot pay. He will go to his grave a lost man, unsaved, unrighteous, and will wake up in God's hell forever lost. Now, those whom God saves are also debtors, not to the law, but they're debtors to God. You read Romans chapter 8, verse 12, and you'll find Paul saying, "Brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live after the flesh." The thing we are to infer is we are debtors to God to live after the Spirit. By the fact that Christ has saved us from this plight where we can't obey the law of God, we can't do enough and be good enough to get into heaven. The fact that Christ has saved us from that awful state, from this bondage to sin and this wrath of God, we are debtors. We are obligated to live to God a life of obedience and a life of gratitude.